Welcome, everyone. Welcome. So glad to have you all here tonight. I'm Alan Lowe, the Executive Director of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Museum. Wonderful to have you here. Thank you. Thank you. What a great crowd. I cannot tell you how excited I am about tonight's speaker, but before we get to his introduction, I want to first recognize a couple of good friends here tonight. Mike Murtaugh from Eureka College, that college of that great Illinoisan Ronald Reagan is here tonight. And John Morris, my good friend who serves as the CEO of the Peoria Riverfront Museum. John, Mike, thank you so much both for being here. If you haven't been up to the Peoria Riverfront Museum, go. It's an awesome place, and right now their bicentennial exhibit is truly wonderful. So great partners with us here, and look forward to lots of partnerships with Eureka College in the future. So thank you both for being here. Speaking of exhibits, I hope you all have been to our special exhibit, From Illinois to the White House, Lincoln, Grant, Reagan, Obama, right now in our Illinois gallery. If you've been, or if you haven't been, please go. If you have been, please go again. If you have been, you know we have amazing things in there, like the cards Ronald Reagan used at the Berlin Wall, the saddle that Ulysses Grant used at the end of the Civil War, the first 3D bust made by a 3D printer of a president, Barack Obama, and Lincoln's briefcase that he used in the White House. And we believe he stored drafts in there of, among other things, the Emancipation Proclamation. So just one of many things you'll see in that special exhibit, which is open for the rest of this bicentennial year. I'm really proud of it, so I hope you will go there soon and often. Now, looking at upcoming events, I'm proud of this place also in that we do a lot. So I won't bore you with all of those things tonight. Please go on our website, presidentlincoln.illinois.gov, and you'll see all of our programs listed there, on Facebook as well. But one I just want to note tonight, because I'm super excited about it, on June 14th, so a little bit in the future, we will have a program here that reviews the lives and legacies of the 4 First Ladies represented in our special exhibit. Our state historian, who's a member of our staff, Samuel Willer, will talk about Mary Lincoln. Our director of acquisitions, Ian Hunt, will tell us about Julia Grant. Our Lincoln historian, Kristen McWhirter, will talk about Michelle Obama, and I get the best task. I get to talk about Nancy Reagan. So I'm really, really excited about that. So please join us on June 14th for what promises to be a really, really fun evening. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. When Dale Wilber's book, Rawhide Down, came out, I believe in 2011, I think I was the very first guy in line to buy it. It is a remarkable book telling the story of the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan on March 30th of 1981, a day I certainly remember like it was yesterday. The details of that event and the backstory that led to the saving of the president really just spellbinding how close our nation came to losing Ronald Reagan and the horrible injuries sustained by others. Very sobering tale, and one that is told so well by Dell. Dell writes for the Wall Street Journal, part of a very impressive career in journalism that has included positions with the Los Angeles Times, Bloomberg News, the Washington Post, and the Baltimore Sun. In his current work with the Wall Street Journal, he covers, among other beats, the Justice Department and the FBI. So Dell's pretty busy right about now. I don't know if you all have noticed that or not. So we're honored he's here anyway, but especially with that, I know it has to be a very challenging job. President Reagan believed he survived the attempt on his life for a reason. And that belief helped spur him on in many things, including the negotiating efforts with the Soviet leadership, which in the end changed our world and ended the Cold War. So I think the attempted assassination was truly an important turning point in our history. And I'm honored to have Dale Wilber here tonight to talk about it. Please welcome Dale Wilber.
Everyone hear me all right? I think I'm going to take you on the road. That was an amazing introduction. And I'm just so glad that my day job, that today I get to talk about a shooting where someone almost died, which is a lot less stressful than the stuff I'm doing right now at the Wall Street Journal. So I got to warn you, has everyone, this is the first time I've been here in Springfield, and I went and toured the museum today. It's amazing. I went and watched that really cool the documentary, Lincoln's Eyes, sitting there. And unfortunately, these seats don't vibrate and no smoke will come out. Because that scared the out of me. I was sitting there, I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. The guy's like, it's like three-dimensional. I'm like, yeah, I'm getting into this. School kids are really into it. Then boom, I'm like, what the heaven, you know? And then smoke is coming out. I'm like, God, they took this to a whole new level, man. How do I top that in a talk about, I don't even have audio visual, man. If you had told me that there was like a moving theater with like smoke machines and all that cool stuff and 3D imagery and the guy coming out at you, I would have brought like at least a picture. But no one warns me. I'd like a presidential library, man. They're lucky that, you know, everyone's alive, still coming and talking. All right, so I wrote a book, Rawhide Down, The Near Assassination of Ronald Reagan, published in 2011. It's sometimes easier if I can kind of talk about how I got into this idea. So it was like 2008, and John Hinckley, so you know this is a work of nonfiction, narrative nonfiction. I don't kill Reagan. He survives this. I can't remake history. So I got to give away some spoilers in the beginning, so I just ask you to withhold judgment of the spoilers we get to you. John Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Little spoiler. And he was sentenced, or not sentenced, I guess, he was sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital for the Insane in Washington, D.C. And he was sent there in 1982, and he was there for a long time. But towards early 2000s, he starts getting more freedom from a federal judge because they realize he's not a danger to himself and others. And he gets like, you know, 3-day furloughs, week-long furloughs with his mother in Williamsburg. And I cover some of these hearings where they go at it in court, where Hinckley's lawyers and the hospital say, he's much better, he needs more freedom. The government's like, he nearly killed the President of the United States, we don't know anything about him, we can't let him have more freedom. And they went back and forth, and the judge, a very thoughtful federal judge, eventually grants him more freedom. And now today, 2016 I believe, he's now on permanent furlough in Williamsburg. He's an old guy, has arthritis, he can't move around, he's not a danger to anyone, I don't think. But I'm covering these hearings in 2008, and I'm like 15 feet from this guy. And they're talking about intimate aspects of his sex life and stuff, and he has no emotion at all. It was the strangest experience. It's as if someone had taken a plastic mask of his face while he was sleeping and stuck it on there, and like no emotion at all. And I was 15 feet away, and it stuck with me, and I was like, gosh, man, it was so cool today. I'm a history buff, read a lot of history, and I'm so close to a guy that almost changed history. That's so neat. What a neat job I have. And I laughed. It's in the back of my mind. And then maybe 5 weeks later, a couple months later, it's a little hazy now, I get called over to the Washington field office of the FBI. The director of the Washington field office of the FBI is concerned that he's heard that I got a tip about an FBI investigation involving wiretaps of Ethiopian taxi cab drivers bribing DC officials. Nothing to do with Hinckley, all right? So I'm like, all right, you know, Del, we don't want you to run this story. We don't want you to write this story. If you write this story, we're totally toast. We've been working on this investigation a really long time. And so I'm sitting at his conference table. He's giving me this whole spiel. Please don't wreck our case. You know, you can't print this. And I'm like, okay, well, in my mind, I'm kind of weighing. I'm like, you know, bribing a DC official is kind of like a dog bites man story. If it was the other way around, it'd be maybe a man bites dog story. I mean, this happens pretty frequently, frankly, in DC. So I'm like, all right, I'll hold off on writing about it until you get an indictment or something, I guess. And he's like, okay, great. Talking, he gets up, goes over to a drawer, hear him rummage through this drawer, and it comes over and slaps something heavy in my hand. And I look down, it's a gun. And I go, wow, you really don't want me to write this story, do you? He goes, that's Hinckley's gun. I was like, what's Hinckley's gun doing in your drawer? Like, you can't walk out of DC without bumping into a museum, okay? Like, literally. Like, you walk out one, there's a museum. There's another museum. There's a museum. Why isn't it in a museum? Launches me on this odyssey where I go to the public library to find a book about this day, March 30th, 1981. I couldn't find a book about it. There was one book, very academic history of the 25th Amendment. And so I'm like, I'm going to get into this. And so I start with Jerry Parr, the agent who I learned saved Reagan's life not once but twice on this dramatic day. And I didn't think he'd talk to me. You know, Secret Service, they're secret in the name, right? They're not going to talk to you. No, you couldn't shut Jerry up, you know. That guy, man, if you buy him a Reuben, and that guy, you own him, man. Like, why aren't you guys like this now? If I could just get the FBI or the Secret Service to talk to me with a Reuben sandwich, man, I'd be golden reporter. I'd buy Reubens all the time, you know. Wouldn't stop talking. Very dramatic day. And I think it helps, once I got into that, I got the doctors, and that gets me into this, and I realized that this day didn't almost change history. It's as Chris was talking about. This is an inflection point. This day did change history in almost as dramatic a way as if Reagan had been killed. For the same reasons Chris said, stealing my thunder a little bit, but we're going to forgive him because he has such a great museum. I'm just teasing. Totally teasing. March 30th, 1981, rainy, dreary day in Washington. Reagan, this is only his 70th day in office. A lot of people kind of forget it happened so early in his first term. Things aren't going particularly well for the president. Approval ratings in the dumps, the lowest any president that early in the first term until the current president's approval rating. A lot of trouble, infighting in the administration. Al Haig and the White House staff's already come to arms. Yet another problem with the Secretary of State. I guess, God, there's so many circular things in history. But anyway, they're having some problems. Things aren't going particularly well, and Reagan has one item on his schedule this day, and that's a speech at the Washington Hilton Hotel, which, if anyone's been to Washington Hilton Hotel, it's this hotel that's designed so all the rooms look down on Washington. It was built in the 1950s and 60s, and the only way you can have a big event in Washington, a big hotel, something really good, is if you can get the president to come. And so they designed this whole thing to get the president there. They have a VIP entrance for the president, all this great stuff. And so he has a speech there at the AFL-CIO. What I learned about Reagan on this day, which is really interesting, is that everyone thinks he was an actor. Everyone knows Reagan was an actor. He read what was put in front of him. Well, I'm digging through the Reagan library, and I find he had rewritten this whole speech by hand, this nothing speech, the AFL-CIO, nothing speech, right? This is not like a major policy announcement. It's nothing like that. This is not a major speech. He rewrote it by hand. And you found his handwritten rewrites. He spent the weekend rewriting it. And he made it a lot better. He was very sharp. Reagan came to office with a fully formed political consciousness. He knew what he thought. He knew why he thought it. He was articulate. He was very good with words. He did not just read a script. This guy wrote his own script. All right? And in many ways, he rewrote the script of his presidency on this day. Dreary day, as I said. One speech, Washington Hilton Hotel, 2 o'clock. He's going to the Hilton. They get there in the 15-car motorcade, gets to the Hilton. He goes and delivers a speech. He does a pretty perfunctory, but he does a good job of speech. He rewrote it. The woman he rewrote it is now married to George Will, the columnist. So I interviewed her. It was kind of interesting. She's a very smart person. She wrote it was her first major speech. He gives a speech, he's leaving. It's 2:27 p.m., and he's heading towards the limousine. Remember, I talked about how they had built this hotel to attract the president with the VIP entrance, right? VIP. Well, they didn't consult the Secret Service when building the driveway. It was too narrow to support the 13,000-pound Lincoln Continental limousine. So they dropped the president off. Their options are leave the car there, have him get back in, and try to navigate this winding, narrow driveway out, in which case they worried they could get stuck in a curb or get caught in crossfire and not get away. So if there was ever an incident. Also, the top of the driveway was guarded by a DC police vehicle to block cars coming down. And DC still has trouble maintaining their vehicles and everything, obviously. But back then, in the early 80s, they broke down a lot. And they were worried it could break down and get them caught. And so their compromise was to back the car out about 30 feet away and angle it towards the street, T Street, forcing the president to walk from the VIP entrance, those 25 to 30 feet to the car. 15 feet away from that open door is a rope line. That's where the rope line had always gone. It was always there. 100 previous visits to this hotel by a president in the last decade, that's where the rope line always was. It kept the press back, kept people back, that was all it was. No one was screened in that rope line. Reagan's walking towards the limousine. 2:27 p.m., John Hinckley is behind that rope line. He pulls out a revolver from his pocket, .22 caliber, takes aim, and thinks, I'm gonna shoot the president, and I'm gonna get shot by the Secret Service. This is the end of me. He was there because John Hinckley was on a cross-country trip from California, where he had made another stab at being a songwriter, failed at it, got in a bus, came across. He had been obsessed with, we know, the movie actress Jodie Foster. She was at Yale University studying, not acting, but theater and drama and stuff. She had taken a break from Hollywood. And he had stalked her at Yale the previous fall, left notes under her door, called her on the phone. He recorded these calls so we know what he said. And she was merciless. He would hear these women laughing in the background as he was calling Jodie Foster. He'd say, "What are you guys laughing at?" He'd say, "We're laughing at you." Deeply wounded him. She couldn't get his name right. He said, if I can get the president, if I can shoot the president, Jodie will know me. He had stalked Jimmy Carter on the 1980 campaign. He hunted Carter down to a Dayton, Ohio event. He got within arm's reach of the president, but he left his guns at the bus depot. Jerry Parr, an agent who would play a major role this day, was there. May have even confronted Hinckley, doesn't even remember it. Hinckley is there, and he's in D.C. He's on his way. He's going to take a bus from D.C. on this March 30th, hop a bus to New Haven, where he's going to shoot Foster, shoot himself, or just kill himself in front of her. That's his plan. But he is coming back from getting an Egg McMuffin sandwich, opens the Washington Star newspaper, and sees the president's schedule on A4. He's going to be giving a speech at the Washington Hilton. Oh, I'm going to change my plan. I'm going to go to the Hilton, and I'm going to shoot the president of the United States, or try, and then Jodie Foster will know me. He even writes a very dramatic note to her about, "Jodie, if I'm successful in my chance to get the president, you will know who I am," to that effect. And so he's there, 2:27 p.m. He pulls out his handgun, 6-shot revolver, 22 caliber, and unleashes 6 shots in 1.7 seconds. 1.7 seconds is the time it takes me to say 1.7 seconds. Just think about that for a second. First shot hits Jim Brady, the press secretary, in the head. He falls to the ground. The second shot hits Tom Delahanty, a D.C. police officer, in the back. He falls to the ground. The way to Reagan should be clear. But Jerry Parr, the 50-year-old head of the Secret Service detail, is already reacting. He's shoving Reagan towards that open limousine door. The third shot goes high. And I'm not surprised that third shot went high. John Hinckley took a ton of target practice, but never at a moving target. Gets him behind that limousine door. Fourth shot hits Tim McCarthy, a Secret Service agent, square in the belly, just like this. He blocked the bullet without a bulletproof vest. Ironic on this day, or not ironic, more like tragic, the agents and the officers, they've gotten complacent. We don't need our vests today. It's just the Hilton. Good lesson there. Fifth shot hits the bulletproof window of this car. These had suicide doors. This was a Lincoln Continental, 1972. They'd stopped doing this in 68. Took them time to get it out. The doors opened backwards. They were called suicide doors because if they ever opened by accident when you were driving 60 miles an hour, they'd rip off and people would fall out and die. Or you were driving along, they opened up, you'd hit like a fire hydrant and rip the door off, right? But in this case, because they were backward opening and the way the car was, that bullet slapped that window and did not hit the president. The sixth shot cracks across the driveway. Until later, no one knows where that bullet went. It slapped off the side of the limousine, slipped through a gap that wide between the door and the door frame, and struck Reagan 5 inches below his left armpit. Lands in a tumble, the door slammed shut. Has everyone seen the YouTube videos or have seen the video of this screaming, yelling? Have that in your mind, the screaming and the yelling and the panic and the guys pulling out Uzis. They're going to jump and do something. They're tackling Hinckley. You can't hear a word in that limousine. It is utterly silent. There's so much armor in that thing, you can't hear anything. Jerry Parr and the president in the back. Parr tells Drew Unruh, the driver, "Let's get out of here, go." Drew Unruh slams down the accelerator and says a silent prayer that he doesn't run over his friend Tim McCarthy, because this 13,000-pound limousine will crush him to death. Takes off, pulls on the street, takes off down Connecticut Avenue, which had been closed to traffic for the president. Drew Unruh barely misses a woman pushing a stroller across the street, heads down the road. Jerry Parr checks the president up and down, runs his hands down his shirt, his thigh. No, he's fine. Reagan's like, "Yeah, I'm a little sore," but thought because he threw him in there, he's okay. Parr gets on the radio. "We're heading back to Crown. Rawhide is okay. We're heading back to Crown." Crown is a code name for the White House. That's the place you want to go if there's a shooting, because that thing is well guarded. You're not going to get another shot at the president at the White House. Safe place to go. 30 seconds later, Reagan's entire presidency changes. The script has already been thrown out the window. It gets thrown out the window again. There is no script. Reagan's complaining of increasing pain in his side, his back, his chest. And Jerry Parr notices Reagan pulls out a napkin from his right coat pocket, dabs it on his lips, and there's blood. and it's bright and frothy blood. So Jerry Parr knows bright frothy blood's from the lungs. Oh, crap. Did I break one of his ribs and puncture a lung when I threw him in the car? What do I do? He has not a lot of time to think about this. Do I keep going to the White House, the safest place in the world? They have a medical facility there. I don't know what's going on. At this moment, there are intelligence reports going across the desks of the highest officials in the land talking about a potential Soviet military intervention in Poland. Is this a decapitation strike? This guy was pretty good. He got close. He got off a lot of shots. They had no idea. This stuff is, if I take him to the hospital, this is before they started stationing agents at every hospital the president could visit. I think there's an advanced man here. Where's Ken? You will attest, there's always an agent at every hospital wherever the president goes, right? That started after this. They didn't have an agent at GW. Do I go to GW where I have no presidential protection? Nothing? God, what do I do? Something tells me to go. Because you see, one of the reasons Reagan lives this day is Jerry Parr reacted so quickly. He reacted in 0.4 of a second before his brain could process there were gunshots. Because they learned a lesson after George Wallace was almost shot to death in Laurel, Maryland. You have to react without thinking. They had not learned this yet. They drilled the agents in the preceding decade to react without thinking. And they gave them a course called 10-minute medicine. Not, hey, we're going to teach you medicine in 10 minutes. That'd be kind of nice. No, how to keep someone alive for 10 minutes. That is a problem, bright frothy blood. We're going to the hospital, Jerry Parr says. They race there. They get there in 3 minutes. They stop right at the door, the emergency room door. Reagan insists on walking inside under his own power. Hitches up his pants. Everyone's seen him do that? Pants. Walks inside, gets in the doors, walks in about 10, 15 feet, and collapses like a dead weight into the arms of his agents. Bam. I interviewed a paramedic who was there, saw Reagan walking in. The paramedic said, Del, I thought the president was Code City, meaning he's going to die. They race him over to the trauma bay. The doctors, nurses throw him on the gurney, and they cut off this brand new suit given him by Nancy Reagan. Not a good idea. You have your work cut out from you. Let me tell you, I had to give this same talk at the Reagan Library. I'm giving the talk, and suddenly Nancy Reagan comes in and sits in the front row. So let's talk about pressure. I had more. But you have a lot of pressure, too. I don't want you to go. So they cut the suit off, cut it right off him. They don't waste any time. We get to this area where the second reason Reagan lived on this day. Cut it off. Nurse is checking his blood pressure. She can't detect it. It's so faint. Finally, she gets it. It's under 60. That is shock territory. 70-year-old president without a detectable blood pressure is not good. She starts to cry. She thinks back to the last time she saw her own father cry, November 1963, when she came home and he was watching footage of the assassination of John Kennedy. They were all convinced he was a goner, heart attack, punctured lung, he wasn't going to make it. But they all have a job to do. Emergency medicine had changed in the preceding years to be, we're not going to wait for the doctor to tell us what to do. Everyone has a job to do, a job. You're doing the intravenous in this one, you're doing the intravenous in that one, you're checking the blood pressure, you're doing this, you're hooking up this machine, you're pulling packets off the walls. No one's thinking. They take thinking out of it. They get his blood pressure up. They stabilize him. If they had been a minute or two later, Reagan doesn't live. It was that close. I mean, it's insane. So they're checking him out. He's there. They've infused him with fluids, and he's getting better. Like, he's gotten color in his face, but they can't tell what's wrong with him until a surgical intern comes in and looks down, and they're like, oh, man. The Parr's like, I think he's having a heart attack. Another person's like, oh, I think he cracked a lung. I don't know what's going on. How do we do this? What do we do? And this guy looks at Reagan's naked body there and sees a little nick. Anyone have a dime? You have a dime? I only have quarters. I'm not giving you a quarter. That's a nickel. I need a dime. Who has a dime? I'm not giving you a quarter for a dime either. No one have a dime?
We don't have any money.
You have no. Oh, wait a minute. And I'm from D.C., so I was faking you out, trying to steal your last dime. That's me, Mr. D.C., swamp monster. Dime. The bullet had gotten flattened into the shape of a dime and had hit the president edgewise and tumbled end over end through his lung. So there's no blood coming out on the outside. There's just a little slit. And that's what this surgical intern noticed. I think he had been shot. Meanwhile, they're checking his blood, his pressure, right? So on the right side, they put a stethoscope here, and it's hollow like a drum. Boom, 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 drum. Okay, there's good air. Left side, solid with blood. Profuse internal bleeding. You solve it with a chest tube. Jam a chest tube in his side between a couple ribs, and the blood drains out. The lung reinflates. 90% of gunshot victims, they do not take the bullet out because it's already sterile in you. Rooting it out only makes it worse. How did one of those other presidents die? Jim Garfield. Because they were rooting around with dirty fingers in his wound. I mean, come on. I mean, that was before they knew, but like, come on. See, I didn't take your dime. That's good. I was like, I had the dime. I'm like, did I steal someone's dime again? Did I steal someone's dime? I'm worth 10 cents. All right. So they're rooting. They realize he's been shot. They drain the blood, and that usually fixes everything. But it doesn't. The blood keeps coming and coming and coming. On this day, the 70-year-old president of the United States would lose more than half his total blood volume. That is a stark statistic. So they decided to rush him to surgery and to get the bullet, because the doctor has two thoughts. One, he's nervous that this little piece of shrapnel, because it's a tiny little bullet, will shoot into an artery into his brain and kill him. Or we have to go in and stop the bleeding, because we can't keep him bleeding. And three, I know it's not quite standard procedure, but I really don't want to be the doctor with the New York Post headline that says, "Doc leaves bullet in president." So they go do that. And this is how you know how close and dramatic this day was. It is insane to me that no one really picked up on this. As this doctor's hunting frantically for this bullet in Reagan's chest, a 33-year-old surgical intern, a literal nobody, a guy who woke up that day to do like gallbladder operations, is assisting on the surgery because the main surgeon wanted his normal team there. They didn't want to give the president any special treatment, because that's when you get screwed up and you die, when you have a committee trying to treat you. It's kind of like when a committee of editors tries to edit one of my stories. They wreck it. This is not going on the internet, right? Not the editors at the Wall Street Journal. So so they're trying to find this bullet. This 33-year-old surgical intern, a nobody, just an average dude, man. As this guy, this main surgeon, Dr. Ben Aaron's trying to get this bullet and stop the bleeding, Dave Adelberg reaches his hand into the president's chest, gently cups the president's beating heart in his hand, and nestles it aside. A 33-year-old surgical intern literally held the beating life of the president in his hand. Let that sink in. So, I don't change history. Reagan survives. A lot of sympathy. But what do we learn about Reagan, and what does Reagan learn about himself through this process that changes the world? What we learn about Ronald Reagan. His wife, and let this thing sink in, okay? Just ponder this. He has a chest tube in his side. He's like naked on the gurney. The wife that he loves, who is not exactly the easiest person to deal with, but they had a very close bond, comes into the trauma bay, and he sees her. And the first thing he says to her is, "Honey, I forgot to duck." Now that's a funny line, right? But what does that tell you about Reagan? Who is Reagan worried about at that moment? Is he worried about himself? That's complete, utter empathy. That is complete, I'm not worried about my own well-being. I want my wife to be calm, even though I'm the one with a bullet that when they plucked it was an inch from his heart. Okay? So he says that to Nancy Reagan. He's getting wheeled into surgery, and his top advisors are there, Baker, Meese, and Deaver. He looks at them and says, "Hey guys, who's minding the store? Meaning the White House? Well, Al Haig. I mean, I can entertain you for hours on that one. Well, geez, what's he trying to do there? Hey, guys, everyone calm down, man. I got this under control. Gets into surgery. And right before these doctors who are clearly nervous as the bugs, I'm cutting out the curse words I tend to drop because there's a youth here. He says, gets up dramatically on an elbow, takes off his oxygen mask and says, I hope you're all Republicans. Puts it back on and lays it back down. To which one of the doctors, a very, very liberal Dr. Giordano, looks at him and says, today, Mr. President, we're all Republicans. What is that about? That's about calming the people down around you. Saying, hey, guys, treat this like how do you have that presence of mind to be like, hey, treat this like anyone else, okay? Forget who I am, okay? It's just have fun, all right? Now, these words get out, and the public hears them. And at this point in time, yes, Reagan gets a lot of sympathy. But what do we learn about Reagan? We've been wondering, is he an actor? Does he just have these lines at ready disposal? He's kind of a funny, quirky guy. Not quirky, but, he's a cold warrior. But is he, genuine? Let me tell you, when you've been shot, you can't fake it, okay? This is who you really are. The doctors and nurses were like that. I mean, they've never come across a patient who was that courageous and brave at that moment, who didn't cry and panic, who worried about what other people how they were handling the situation. I also uncovered something that told me something about Reagan's psyche and his ability to kind of see ahead. So he's in the emergency room earlier than this moment, and he looks up at Jerry Parr, the agent over him, who's standing there, and looks up at Reagan, looks up at Jerry and says, Jerry, I hope they're all Republicans. And Jerry looks down and goes, what the fuck are you talking about? Will you shut up? Nurse technician here heard him say the same thing. She's like, will you stop joking? You could die here, pal. She didn't actually say that, obviously. She's thinking it in her head. That told me something. Reagan recognized, you know what? That's a good line. I'm going to take that good line and stick it in my back pocket and use it later at some point. Who does that? You've been shot, man. So he puts that in the back pocket. Then it hits me. And I'm like, I had spent all this time researching this book, and I've watched almost all of Reagan's movies, from the worst ones. By the way, Reagan's worst movie, Code of the Secret Service, came out in 1930s. Someone here probably remembers the day. I don't. It slipped in my mind. But Jerry Parr, when he was 9, went and saw that movie, and it inspired him to become a Secret Service agent. Right. So I watched all these movies, and Reagan's a far better actor than people gave him credit for. I think that, I don't know why he never became a big star, but his 2 best scenes and his 2 best movies, the Eureka College contingent cannot answer this because they probably know the answer, because I've done this talk before with them. What are Reagan's 2 best, most well-known movies? New Rockney. King's Row. What were his 2 best scenes in those 2 best movies? Hospital-like deathbed scenes. Where's the rest of me? Do you get it? You see, this is all now holy.
It's all coming together.
Yeah, I know. It's like Hollywood wrote it, but it didn't. So the world hears all this stuff about Reagan, and as David Broder told me and Luke Cannon told me, it gave Reagan this kind of insulation to the rest of his presidency, where others would get crippled by scandals like Iran-Contra and things like that. He always had this base of goodwill with the American people. Even when his poll numbers went down, they never, ever hit basement level, because I think people recognize who he really was as a person. And I think that goes a long way. You may disagree with someone's politics and policies. You may not like them as a person. I think they have no moral core, but you like their policies. With Reagan, they liked him as a person. They liked his kind of stature and his courage in this moment, but maybe gave him a pass on some of the policy thing. I don't know. But I found that really interesting. So Reagan comes out of this, as Chris said, I was spared for a purpose. God spared, he was in the hospital for 11 days. And he was spared for a purpose. And that purpose was to end the threat of nuclear war and to win the Cold War. Reagan was very good at crystallizing complex things. His theory to winning the Cold War was very simple. We win, they lose. Very simple. One last fun anecdote about Reagan. I just love this anecdote about his kind of ability to use humor in a way that's kind of deeper and empathetic than people, I think, believe at the time. And Tim McCarthy had been shot, obviously, the agent. He's the first one to get out of the hospital. And Reagan summons him to his room in the hospital. Reagan was there for 11 days. And so McCarthy's like, well, yeah, I'm going to go. But McCarthy's having a hard time getting over this. This is before PTSD counseling, all that stuff, right? And it's like, McCarthy's having a hard time getting over this. I just got shot. Do I want to go back to work? How do I do this? You know, and he, by the way, he's a police chief up in Orland Park, Illinois now. Or he was the last I checked. He may have moved on to another job. That was a couple years ago. And he goes up with his family. And he had 2 young kids, and they're running around Reagan's hospital room. And I remember him going, and I had 2 young kids at the time as I interviewed him, and I totally understood this. Like, he's like, please don't pull out any of the IV tubes. Don't pull out any of the IV tubes. And so he probably looked more stressed than he already was stressed, right? Like, you know when you're kind of stressed, you're meeting the president, you've been shot, he didn't know who you were, now he wants to congratulate you, and you're not feeling so good about having been shot, and now your kids may kill the president by ripping out a tube. You know, you're looking a little stressed. And Reagan looks right at him. Reagan looks right at him and says, Delahanty, McCarthy, Brady, and Reagan, what does this guy have against the Irish? Was Reagan just trying to crack a joke? No. Trying to make this guy feel better. Listen to make him, and McCarthy told me, he goes, you know what, Del? It was so incredible that moment because I realized that the president had put this behind him already, and I could too. I could talk ad nauseum. I don't know how much time I have to talk. I've been going on for 35 minutes, but people usually have lots of questions, stuff I could fill you in on. I could talk a little bit what happened in the Situation Room. We all knew Al Haig. What did Al Haig say? I love this. No, he did not. He said, I am in control. It's interesting that I had that same reaction, so does every audience. I wonder how that happened. How does that I'm in charge permeate? Was there a Saturday Night Live skit or something? I don't know. But so as a historian, someone who loves presidential libraries, as a presidential library directors will appreciate, Dick Allen, the National Security Advisor, took a tape recorder into the Situation Room, put it on the table, and hit record. So for the 5 hours they were in that room, I knew precisely what was said because he gave me the tapes. This is the most sensitive room in the country. Did you see the briefing, the photo recently that came out where President Trump is getting briefed on what they're going to do in Syria? And Nikki Haley's there, and Pence is there, and the generals are there around this table. And they have these briefing books in front of them. Go look it up. Just look at the picture. It's issued by the U.S. government, or the White House. Every piece of paper is blank on their things. They went in and blanked out the paper because this room is so sensitive. And Dick Allen gave me the tapes of this meeting where Al Haig is confused about presidential succession, where Caspar Weinberger, the defense secretary, doesn't know the order of the DEFCON levels. Yeah, I think we're on DEFCON 2. What the hell are you talking about? We're at war? DEFCON 1 is war. The missiles are in the air. DEFCON 2 is we're about to push the button. DEFCON 5 is peace. He thought we were on DEFCON 2. They were on DEFCON 5. DEFCON 4. So they were new. This was 70 days in, right? So I have all this background there. And I just, but it depends on the audience what you want to hear about that. So I have that. And then one other thing, we talked about the meaning it meant to Reagan. We talked about how the agents handled this day and the training they had, and the doctors, how if you'd been shot in Vietnam in the early 70s, you had a better chance of survival than if you'd been shot on the DC street corner. And they reinvented emergency medical care in that next decade, which allowed Reagan to survive. And so I think I hit most of the main topics there. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Have you any questions?
Yeah, any questions? And I meant to say before Del started, if you weren't able to get a book tonight, and we kind of ran out at the end, it's so popular, Del, please, we're taking orders afterwards, and Del has graciously agreed that he'll sign them if we send them up to him. So just let Linda know outside at the end if you want to order a book.
This is my, by the way, don't be shy, this is my favorite part of these talks. Because I invariably always forget something important I meant to say, and you guys always pick up on it. No pressure.
I always heard that one of the things that helped Reagan, for a 70-year-old guy, he was extremely in good shape.
He was definitely in good shape. And in fact, the doctors thought he was like a 50-year-old. And Reagan did a lot of exercises. He lifted weights. He had one of those roller crunch bars he would use back and forth on the ground, push-ups, sit-ups, and he was a good eater. And he also, I think there's a generation, you know, he was the Depression era kid, and I think they just learned to eat less. I'm not kidding. I think he was a moderate person, you know, and he was very disciplined.
Thank you for this. This is really good. But what did, and you talked a little bit, you touched on to it a little bit in the book, but how involved was Jodie Foster in the investigation of John Hinckley as this was all going down? I mean, obviously she'd had contact with this stalker. What all went on in that? Did you get any research in that?
That's a great question. So Jodie Foster reported the guy stalking her to the Yale police. The Yale police looked into it. You know, there was no idea that this guy was then going to go shoot Reagan. He wasn't telling Jodie Foster, hey, I'm going to go kill the president for you. He wanted to have a relationship with Jodie Foster, as far-fetched as that is. And so as time goes on, it's really interesting. I interviewed the agents, the FBI agents, and the Secret Service agents who questioned Hinckley. And what's so interesting about this is, just remember, so they didn't know that Hinckley, like us today, like when I wrote the book, and I hope that if you read the book, you'll see that I wrote it through the eyes of the people as it happened, and they're living it. So, because they don't know the outcome, right? That's what's kind of fun, to get in and play God as a storyteller. You interview them and you run them through everything. And these people did not know 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock on this dramatic day while the president was in surgery. Was John Hinckley a loner? Was he a Russian operative? What was this about? In fact, they were really concerned that 2 Soviet submarines were 2 minutes closer to be able to lob a warhead on Washington, and they didn't have satellite coverage of Eastern Europe because of clouds, so they didn't know if the Russians were moving on Poland. Was this all connected? They didn't know. They didn't know anything about Hinckley. He was an enigma. The DC police, the Secret Service, and the FBI agents at first questioned him. He was a weird guy. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He wasn't nervous. He was just sitting there dumbfaced. He wouldn't tell them what it was about. At one point, the DC police officer is typing up a report, and he's trying to build a rapport, and he's typing with his 2 fingers. I have him in the interview room, and he turns to the Secret Service agent there, helping guard him, and says, hey, and this guy's name is McCarthy, but he's not related to the McCarthy got shot. Hey, McCarthy, how do you spell assassinate? And Hinckley leans in and says, I can spell that for you. And he spelled it for him. Creepy, right? And they didn't know what they were dealing with until the FBI agents later were digging into it and working on him, and he wasn't giving it up. And they brought in a Secret Service agent who spent a lot. Secret Service agents are surprisingly good at dealing with crazy people because they confront a lot of crazy people outside the White House. And when I say crazy people, I'm not being disparaging. I mean, they're serious people. These people have serious mental illnesses, but they walk around with tinfoil hats, and they're screaming outside the White House. They have to deal with these it's like a magnet, and they have to deal with this stuff. And they brought Steve Kolo in to question him, and eventually he peels back Hinckley's story just layer by layer, and he remembers that there was a phone number in Hinckley's wallet with a 503 area code. Don't hold me to that, but the area code for Yale. And he says, what's that there? And he goes, yeah, it was to a girl. A girlfriend? I don't know if she thought I was a girlfriend. He peels back this story and finally figures out what it's about. And Hinckley goes, when you get to my room at the hotel, you'll know everything. And they found the notes and all that stuff. And Jodie Foster would testify at a grand jury about it. I don't remember if she testified at the trial. She may have. I don't think so. She may have. But she was not like instrumental in this. She was kind of like this object, you know, that he got obsessed with and thought, I don't know why, that getting Reagan would impress her. Oh. You need it? You can go ahead. Yeah.
How close was President Bush to, was he being prepped on taking over?
That is, thank you. This is where you guys come in. Vice President Bush was on a trip to Texas politicking for Reagan, getting the tax cut plan passed, all that great stuff out in Texas. They're taking off, and they're leaving Dallas, they're leaving Dallas, where he had dedicated a plaque at the hotel where Kennedy had last stayed, and he's flying, was it Fort Worth? He stayed at Fort Worth, flying up, and, but they left from Dallas. They were at the military base, and which one is that? No.
NAS Dallas, Naval Air Station.
Yeah, but there was anyway, he's taking off, and they're going to Austin. And they're in the air to do another trip. He's supposed to address the state legislature in Austin when they get word that Reagan had been shot. We have to turn this plane around. Haig gets on the radio, but the communications are so bad he couldn't really make it out. Sent him a secure telex, which Haig puts in a book, but it took me a year through fighting FOIA to get released. Basically said, hey, the president was shot. We need you back here, pal. But there was very little Bush could do. Why? Air Force Two did not have secure voice communications. In fact, they were so unsecure that I tracked down 2 University of Alabama grad students who were listening in to some of the conversations via ham radio as it's coming back. So there's very little Bush could do besides monitor the situation. It was really interesting to see how Bush reacted to this. I got his handwritten notes from that day, and one of his aides interviewed him, and he had transcribed this interview because they all believed it was history. What was so amazing about this project was everyone I touched, this day meant, the nurses, the doctors, the agents would be like, yeah, that day meant a lot for me. Should I get my notes for you? Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was like, man, I was like, there's a scene in my last book where this detective solves this murder, and he is so overjoyed for having solved this murder. It was really complicated. He walks outside of this house, and he puts his hands on this railing, and he goes, my God, that's better than sex. And I got to tell you, that's how I feel when I would get these notes, That's how you know I'm a history nerd. I'd be like, oh, my God, these notes are amazing. Well, he had the same notes, right? He took notes of what Bush was saying and thinking at that moment on the plane. And I got it, and Bush was really worried that someone holding Nancy Reagan's hand is, this is a real serious weight that's going to fall on my shoulders. Am I ready for it? I think so. I think I'm prepared for this. They came into him and said, hey, when you land at Andrews, we're going to helicopter you to the White House, and you're going to land and get right in. We can't waste a minute. It's safer that way. And Bush is like, no, only the president lands on the lawn. You're going to fly me to the Naval Observatory, and we'll motorcade down. So you're like, no, we're not going to do that, sir. We need you there instantly, protect you. We don't know if there are other assassins around. He goes, no, you're going to drive me. Which it turned out to be a very nice thing, because he was worried, partly about the noise the helicopter would make for Nancy Reagan, who may have been in the residence. But she actually wasn't. She was at the hospital. But that's really thoughtful. And then he came back. He led a situation room meeting. He delivered an address to the country. And he kind of basically ran things. And what this brings up is a really interesting topic, the 25th Amendment, where you can transfer power from the president to the vice president if the majority of the cabinet agrees and they write a letter to the president pro tem and the Speaker of the House. Temporary transfer power from an incapacitated president to the vice president. And they did this, but not under the 25th Amendment. They made a big point of this. But Reagan temporarily transferred power to Bush when he had a colonoscopy, I believe. And Bush did that with Vice President Cheney with a colonoscopy. They should have done it this day, and they did not. And they did not because they were worried, the president's advisors, that Reagan's 70, we don't want to, Reagan, oh my God, one of the greatest things about Reagan, he had a great eye for talent, right? He really picked the best people. You know who he had as his chief of staff? Jim Baker. What was Jim Baker's job, by the way, before he became chief of staff? He ran Bush's campaign. Bush was his primary advisor. A lot of people around Reagan were really worried that there was going to be a coup d'etat and the Bush clan, who were the establishment, were going to try to take it away from him. But that's how secure Reagan was. I want the best guy in the best job. He was so good at that. And in this case, Baker and others were like, I don't think we want to do the 25th Amendment. One of the most consequential conversations in presidential history, just picture this. They're talking about invoking the 25th Amendment. Baker and Meese, 2 members of the Troika, the top 2 guys, the counsel of the president, the chief of staff, Jim Baker was chief of staff to the president, are having a conversation, a debate about whether they invoke the 25th Amendment in a hospital broom closet. So, anyway, Vice President comes in, he runs the place. They should have invoked the 25th. They did not because they were worried about it looking like a coup and Reagan being kind of old, and they didn't want to make Reagan look. They wanted to make Reagan not to look like he was actually that badly hurt. And that was part of the cover, not a cover-up, but they downplayed the seriousness of everything that happened that day on purpose.
How old were you at the time?
I was 6. I don't remember it. I don't remember it. I wish I was a little younger. Yes, sir. I'm happy to keep going unless people, I'm keep going. I'm not tired. I'm having a great time.
Del, obviously after 9/11, there were a lot of changes in how government reacts to things. Obviously after the '81 assassination, the Secret Service did a lot of things differently from that point on. But the Reagan assassination is very similar to the Squeaky Fromm attack on President Ford. And I wonder if Jerry Parr talked at all about why did they learn those lessons post '81, and really the Squeaky Fromm attack on Ford is kind of almost the exact same thing. It just didn't
She got
work out.
close. Right. It's actually different in this sense. Squeaky Fromm, that was like, I believe, Squeaky Fromm was the one who got close to Ford as he's walking across the park, and an agent actually puts the thumb, has a finger between the hammer and stops it, right? And they were not screened. People were walking around. They thought they could protect Ford all the way through. Who would do this? People are crazy, and she did it. The difference here is if they had they had learned that. So Jerry Parr told me, he said, if this had been in Boston, Austin, San Francisco, anywhere else, there would not have been a rope line that close to the president. It would have been way away. Because we would have been like, oh, what do we got to do here? This is a new event. Yeah, we can't have anyone close. They were complacent. They let complacency get them. This is the way the rope line was. It was always there. The advance man, as you know, the Secret Service advance book, they have old advance books. He pulled the old advance book binder off, went through it. We're going to do all the same things, change a couple things around. Maybe I'll put the backup motorcade in a different place, da-da-da, slap it together, go, right? Because they're busy. They were complacent, and that's what happened. And Jerry Parr owned that. This was an awful blunder. I mean, I wrote it from their perspective, so it's a heroic tale in many ways, but it's also a tale of a massive mess up. The idea that you allow a dude to get it with 15 feet unscreened from the President of the United States is something that cannot happen. It is literally cannot happen. And they knew that then. They own it. They made a mistake. And they, their actions throughout it, when you tell the story through their eyes, it's the tale that happened. Yeah. I think he had his hand up earlier. Sorry, go ahead.
You indicated you gave the same presentation at the Reagan Presidential Library in front of
Yes.
Nancy. So I was just curious, two things. Number one, what was her opinion and reaction to your book? Number two, how did she react, or what was her demeanor and so forth during your presentation and afterwards?
Well, she told me she really liked it, and she cried after reading it. And what hit home for me that day was that Jerry Parr was with me, and we gave the talk together, and it was great to have him there. This guy had lived through this, and I would give the spiel, and then I'd say, hey, Jerry, take over from the limo. It's really cool. And we had dinner with Nancy Reagan, Mrs. Reagan, upstairs in the library. And we were sitting there, and it was kind of neat. She was frail, but this was 2011. She died in 2016? 2016, right? And she turned to Jerry at one moment and put her hand on his arm and said, Jerry, thank you for giving me my life back. Which to me, just like 30 years later, and to her was a blink of an eye. And as you get older, that 30 years, like to me, it seemed when I wrote the book a long time ago. And now 30 years doesn't seem that long. I'm researching another book from the 1930s. That seems old, but maybe I'll get lucky and live long enough. I'm like, 120 years is nothing, I mean, it's not 120, it's 100. Yes?
When I read your book, you kind of feel like that day maybe was a high point for the Secret Service. But they've been in the news the last 4 or 5 years, and it hasn't been good. Do you know, is something happening there that we read these stories about these guys, and it sounds like incompetence and stuff? Has it changed?
I think their low point was like the prostitutes in Colombia, and they were also getting more complacent, I think. I think it's a grueling, grueling, grueling job. where, they're just on the road a lot, and it's thankless, and I think they lose a lot they have a relatively high attrition rate, I believe. I think it's stabilized some. They got more people, so that makes it easier. But, a lot of people need this kind of protection. All the relatives of all the presidents get it all while they're in office. The former presidents all have it. I think people are people, and I know someone came up to me the other day at a book event, and they came up to me and said, and they meant this sincerely, they were not a political person, is the FBI really corrupt and out to get the president? Are they really out to get him? And I was like, and it was not someone I thought that had that kind of political bent where it's ingrained in their head. And I said, I know a lot of FBI agents, and FBI agents are people just like you and me, right? Like, they're good people and bad people. They're good at their jobs or not good at their jobs, all these things. And I think they're just regular people. I don't see this secret society thing. And I think with the Secret Service agents, I think they're people, right? And they screw up, but organizations need to foster these things to do better. And I don't know. I think this day was a colossal screw up. And so, I know it's a high point because Reagan lived. They saved him, and Jerry Parr was quite heroic. Tim McCarthy was heroic. A mistake was made, and they went from there. It's a very dramatic story. But I think people are people. Oh, sorry. Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is totally related to your book, but you seem very intelligent and knowledgeable, and your talk is very interesting, but maybe it's just because I'm retired and I can watch the news more, but is there more fake news going on now than in the past? And how do we get people to treat one another better? It seems like society is getting more disrupted.
The second question I'm probably not qualified to address. I think I went to a Jesuit high school, and I try to treat everyone, even angry. I get a lot of angry emails from readers that just go off on these tangents. And I
say you are what you think, and I have two prayers I say all night long. I'm not the most religious guy, but I think it helps me. I say, God help me help other people, and God help people help other people.
Those are great prayers. What was your first?
If you think of things positively, then positive is more likely to happen. It seems like there's so darn much negative out there.
What was your first question was about fake news?
Yeah.
I actually think right now, I'm really generally proud of my journalistic colleagues. I'm at the Journal, I worked at the LA Times, the Post, New York Times. I'm really proud of them, generally, because I think we're all working so hard, and we're trying so hard to get the story right. That is separate and apart from opinionators. So, like the Rachel Maddows and the Sean Hannitys and those people, I'm not addressing them. I'm not addressing the columnists. The working journalists that I know go in every day and try to get the story right because you're writing the first draft of history, and it's not a game. And so I don't actually think there's more fake news. I think the stuff that makes me nervous are the conspiracy theories that flow around and the stuff that's outlandish that some of my friends will believe. And you're like, no, that's not how it works. That's not, and you can't reach them. And I don't know what we do about that. Again, I'm not qualified to address that. That's something that society we have to decide.
I just try and get people to respect one another more. Every day, everybody I run into, and there's just so much negative stuff coming at us, it just bothers me.
Well, it bothers a lot of people.
Way back in the back.
So how come the gentleman had the gun of Hinckley in his drawer?
The field office had a museum in the front, in its lobby, and this was before 9/11. And then after 9/11, they shut the museum down, and the articles in the museum all went different places. And the then head of that office said, you know what, I'm going to keep this gun as a conversation piece. He kept it in his drawer. And the moment the FBI learned I was writing this book, that thing got taken to the FBI museum, which is also closed to the public unless you have special access through a congressman, I believe. And I got to go, the historian at the FBI, John Fox, is a great guy. And he had me over and he let me hold the gun and pull the trigger, and you could feel it has a very heavy trigger pull. The RG 14, don't hold me to that. It's in the book. It's accurate in the book. You have to read your book every year to remember it. And I did, But that detail escapes me because I have so much going on. And I don't want to screw it up. Like what? Anyway, and the Russians are involved. So you're pulling the trigger, and it's a heavy trigger pull. You had to really. You couldn't just say, "Oh, it went off by accident." You had to really pull it. I thought that was neat.
I have two factual questions for you.
Okay.
One, the story around here is that Reagan was supposed to come speak to the Illinois legislature when he got shot. And then he had to cancel that trip because he got shot. Is that true?
I don't. Yes, probably true. I don't know.
Two, did he ever meet Jodie Foster, and if so, did he crack a joke to her?
I don't think so, but he probably would have. I mean, when Jerry Parr, he was always cracking jokes, man. When Jerry Parr retired, when leaving the Secret Service, the Reagans called him over. They loved this guy. They called him over into the Oval Office, and they come in, and President is like you're like stand up for a second, like you're Jerry, and he's kind of like backing up like this, like that, and Jerry goes, "What's going on?" And the President goes, "You're not going to throw me over the couch, are you?"
I love it. You know, Dell, I can't believe I didn't tell you this earlier. You remind me at the Bush Library, you guys know I was there before I came here. We were very fortunate. At the end of the Bush administration, they renovated the White House Situation Room, and they gave us 2 of the old rooms. So the room where a lot of that happened was at the Bush Library. We put it back together, and we decided we're going to make this an educational space and have a scenario where high school students and others can come in and learn leadership and decision-making lessons. And the scenario we chose for them to be part of was the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. And so they were either in the Situation Room, they were at the hospital, or they were dealing with the press, 3 different groups. And all the different variables that day, working with the Reagan Library, put together an amazing exercise
Were they
for them.
smoking a lot of cigarettes and drinking tab?
Yes, exactly,
Because
yes.
these photos are awesome. It's like this haze of cigarette smoke, and like there are tabs everywhere, you know? So do you get that? I'm teasing.
Well, no, we was constantly smoking cigarettes. So join me in thanking Del Wilber. Thank you.
Thank you very much.